Jackson Osborne. I'm with the Bluegrass Trust for Historic Preservation. Welcome to our July 5th deTour of Henry Clay's law office here in beautiful downtown Lexington, Kentucky. We are thrilled to always partner with our friends at Ashland who have recently acquired the building. I'll leave them to tell you more stuff than that. But what I will tell you is this was one of the first projects that the Bluegrass Trust was involved in saving. So we are always delighted to be here. And what Eric shared with me when I first got here is we actually used to help host tours of the law office here when we first saved it. So it's good to be returning to that. That being said, I will now turn it over to the wonderful Jim Clark to tell you about the law office. And thank you all for being here.
Welcome. This is something that has been on our minds for quite a while. And for mine, I used to sit in that office at Art's Place for 12 years and look at people with their maps walking around Lexington trying to find something to see or experience. And I kept thinking, well, there needs to be more. And then when I got to Ashland, I thought, well, it'd be great if we could get this place because he had such a storied law career and did a number of firsts. It'd be great to have a place where people could learn more about that, but also to have a place where if people wanted to buy tickets to come take a tour, or also the fact that Eric had developed a tour of Clay's Lexington. We could turn that into an audio tour so people can have a self-guided tour of downtown Lexington, experience the Lexington that Clay really experienced. And also with augmented reality, perhaps we're going to be able to show people where Clay's first home was in Lexington, right across the street, which was obviously torn down along with the other historic properties. But maybe with new technology we can help people see what this place used to look like. So I also wanted Eric to talk a little bit about the tour and the Clay's Lexington. But also, if you know anyone who loves history, loves people, who loves to sell stuff, we could use some help in here, because I think staffing is really going to be a critical issue for us. Keeping this open for regular business hours, Monday through Saturday, and making sure that we're available to the public all the time. So, Eric?
Jim, Clay's Lexington. This is kind of where it started for Clay. This is the oldest part of Lexington. As Jim said, Clay had a house right over there. Next door was his in-laws' home, the Hart House. That's the Hart House, and next to it may be Clay's house. I'm not sure. It's very hard to find any images of that house. Pass that around. So those two houses stood there. The Harts moved here in 1794. Clay moved here in 1797. Was admitted to practice of law first in Winchester, as far as we know. I guess that's the first place he got around to going to get admitted, and then shortly after he was admitted in Fayette County. Began practice. We are not sure where he lived up until he built that house, which would have been 1799, 1800, after he got married. But he probably rented quarters here in town. His parents lived over in Versailles, so he spent some time there. But he began the practice of law here, and that was all sorts of things. A lot of property matters. Kentucky was a state where people had a very easy time finding property and a much more difficult time taking legal possession of it. So he helped with that and settling those disputes. He did a lot of estate law. For example, James Morrison, for whom Old Morrison is named, is an estate Clay wrote up, he did the will, and then he managed the estate when Morrison died. So he was doing a lot of that. Other civil matters, debt collections, bankruptcies, that kind of thing. A very small amount of criminal law. Clay never liked criminal law a great deal, I don't think, and didn't do it often. But perhaps the most famous case in his entire career was one that he handled while he was working here, and it was, in fact, a criminal case. he defended Aaron Burr on charges of treason. All he really did was represent him during the grand jury process, and he managed to work things in a way that the grand jury returned a bill of no true bill, so he was not indicted. Clay later regretted that and said publicly that he was wrong, that Aaron was absolutely guilty, and he should not have represented him. He was taken in by Aaron, and Aaron Burr in charge, so that didn't work out so well. So this is where Clay started his life, and many of those sites in this area are connected. The tour will actually go that direction, I think, at this point, down to the courthouse and that environs. That's where Clay would have gone to court. I believe that's the 5th courthouse in that location. And so the original would have been there. And in fact, that was where the courthouse remained for circuit court up until about 2000 when they opened the new ones down here. So he practiced there. The other thing about that location is that it was a marketplace for all sorts of things, but most importantly enslaved people. And that was true for Clay. He bought and sold people on that site. So that is a really important part of his life. We will talk about that in that location. We will go around, go up Market to the Episcopal Church where Clay attended. His pew is marked. We'll talk about his religious life. Go on up Market Street. Probably stop at the Peter House and talk about Robert Peter, physician at Transylvania University, and later the doctor at the hospital, which was down here, which treated soldiers during the Civil War. His daughter, Frances, was an epileptic, and as a result, was not accepted in society. She could not go out because people didn't know what to do with epilepsy. They didn't understand it, and it scared people. So she stayed in her home, and from her little perch in the house, looked out over Gratz Park, and you could see all that was going on during the war. Wrote a diary about it. It's a wonderful diary. It includes some very interesting information about the Clay family and things that happened out at Ashland in the adjoining Mansfield farm. So it's a neat place to stop and a neat story. Then we'll go up to Transy, the old Morrison, which is the oldest building on the campus. It is the building that Clay oversaw the construction of when the original building, which was in the middle of the park, burned. It burned in a fire. Clay oversaw the construction of Old Morrison, and so that is there today as a result of his efforts. Then we'll come back down Mill Street, probably talk about the Benjamin Gratz house. Clay was a good friend of Benjamin Gratz's. Benjamin Gratz was, of course, a very wealthy merchant who moved here to town. And then next door was John Wesley Hunt, a man known as the first millionaire in Kentucky, who was a hemp merchant, like Henry Clay. They also became very close, knew each other very well. They were prominent slaveholders, etc. So we have a series of stops that will elucidate not only the early life, but lots of things from across the life of Henry Clay in the area of town that he knew best. We'll come back here and finish at the law office. So it's a neat tour, and it allows us to highlight some things that we don't really talk about much at Ashland. So that's a good thing to do, and to utilize places that Clay actually was and were important in his life. So we're really glad to be able to do that.
Mark, is this not the oldest sort of business building in Lexington?
I don't know about the oldest business building in Lexington. It is the only surviving law office, for certain was an office of Henry Clay's, and it is about the first law office that he had outside of his home. So that's where this career started, and it ended in 1810 here because of several things. First of all, he was finishing an unexpired term in the United States Senate. Then he was elected to the United States House of Representatives, where the next year, on November the 4th, he would become Speaker. So he just didn't have time to continue the practice of law with all that was going on politically. And politics would dominate his life until after the war of 1812. So that's why he left this space. He would occupy several more. You may be familiar with Henry Clay's public house. That's a building that Clay built that he at least used as rental property and may have at times practiced law from down next to the courthouse. So this is the oldest surviving structure of that sort that he practiced in, and the only one that we know for sure was his law office. So you can see it was built by Stevens and Winslow. The brick was done by a man named John Fisher. Fisher had a brickyard across Richmond Road from Ashland, and the bricks for the original house were made at Fisher's brickyard by enslaved laborers, including a boy named Peter Still. We know about Peter because he created the slave narrative that tells the story of his life. It's a fascinating book called The Kidnapped and the Ransomed. I highly recommend it. His job at the Fisher Brickyard was to move bricks from the yard into a storage warehouse. And his task, he was 8 years old when he got there, his task was to move 3,000 bricks every day. That yard to that warehouse. He talks all about it in the book. It's a really great read. It is interesting as well because one of Peter's relatives is someone very famous here in Lexington. And that's actually how I got to know about the story. Her name is Valerie Still, the all-time leading scorer in men's or women's basketball at the University of Kentucky. So she's done a lot of research on her ancestry, and she was the one that came to me initially and asked if we knew about this, and I said, no, I don't, but thank you for letting me know. And so we learned a lot more about it there. Fascinating experience.
Excuse me.
So the church door.
All right. Excuse me.
Take a break for it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ooh.
It squeaks too.
Yeah, this stuff is scary.
You got it. Oh yeah. It is wobbly. My basement has a fireplace in it too.
That's the solar thing.
Oh yeah.
Oh, those steps were painted on my solar steps.
I think it's a coal chute at the top.
Oh,
Like
is
the
it?
hole. I'm not sure. You see what you
I
think.
bet you're right. I bet that's exactly what it is.
That last one's a doozy. Oh, you okay?
It's a broad step there. So
Yes.
Yeah.
That one needs to have a sign on it.
Yellow.
Careful. I'll hold that one. Yeah. Yep. Of course.
Oh, yes.
Oh, really? Thanks for joining us at Henry Clay's Law Office. We'll see you next month for August's Bluegrass Trust deTour.